Our next dialogue, I'm extremely excited about. Welcome, gents. And I'm going to go ahead and come over here and sit down. I was extremely excited about the first one, extremely excited about all of them. But this one also. We have three individuals. I'm going to introduce them and ask them to come up one at a time. This time, the first I'd like to introduce is Tom Crowther. Tom Crowther I heard about when I was at Arup. And my team was just enamored with his work. It was like, wow, come on, what is this? Very cool. And then, okay, she told you to come up. Okay. And then, he's a professor of ecology at the ETH in Zurich, co-chair of the advisory board for United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, and the founder of two entities, Restore and Seed, which are platforms to provide connectivity and transparency to thousands of conservation and restoration projects around the world. And also, Seed is a biodiversity monitoring tool. And both of those are trying to use contemporary technology to measure the wealth and health of nature across the globe. So let's welcome Tom up to the couch. Tom, come on up. And next we have Claudia Roosli. Did I say it right? Roosli. Is that better? I'm working on it. I got to, Roosli. It's a fascinating what she does. She's worked for more than 10 years in the field of space, nature, and geoscience research and development. And she really focuses on solution-oriented thinking, especially with satellite Earth observation data, trying to help to understand our planet, the knowledge about our planet, and ideas about knowledge that can be utilized in industry. And her desire is to contribute for a better understanding of Earth systems to enable data-driven decision-making to allow the development of societally relevant applications for nature protection and conservation. So with that, Claudia, welcome to the 2040 stage. And last but not least, we met him this morning, Diego Hangartner. Now, Diego, I met at a presentation at ETH during ETH with the students, when he was talking to the students before the beginning of the semester, helping them to understand some advice and some insights on how the brain works and how to help relax. I'm bastardizing entirely what you did, but it was so impressive to hear someone talk about the brain function and how to help us find a center and for students, and I took it very seriously as I was listening to him, to be able to relax, to focus, and find a center again, because how he mixed this scientific research and internal meditative exploration of the mind and consciousness. And he started at ETH as a pharmacologist, specializing on psychopharmacology and addiction. He was always interested in what it meant to have a healthy mind. And then, as he realized the healthy mind, there's some meditation could actually impact your mind. He said, I'm going to go to the source, and worked with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. And we can talk about that a little bit more in due course. But I'm talking too long. Diego, come on up here. Come on. I think there's the heat getting to me too. But it's wonderful to have the three of you up here. Thank you so much for that. And I want to start with Claudia. Claudia, there's a phenomenon which is called the overview effect. The overview effect is where astronauts and those who go up to our space stations look down on our Earth and they get overwhelmed by seeing this little tiny fragile blue pearl, if you will. And tell us about that and how does that connect to your work when you observe? Can you relate to this as well?
Yes, thanks for the question. In general, I think seeing the globe from outside is something that's very special and unique to the astronauts. So no one else can imagine that. So it's very overwhelming for them. However, I'm not really the person who wants to go up to space because I must be a nice chance, but I have a lot of duties and they're influenced by being outside of the Earth and not protected. So it's not really my thing. What I'm doing is I try to use the technologies that are around to look also at the globe, but as a whole. So picturing the entire Earth from above to get the overview. And nowadays we are able to even zoom in quite a bit, actually, from space, which is nice. And then also to get like this big picture of how the planet is functioning, changing, developing, our impact on Earth, and what we could make better, and where it is changing, in what direction.
And so, thank you. And I'm going to go, Tom, your work, you're using basically the same type of vision. You're zooming out, you're getting closer, to zooming in, trying to understand what's going on in the planetary standpoint. Share a little bit about how this relates with your work.
Yeah, absolutely. Is this on? Yeah. We do sort of global scale ecology, which is a bit of an oxymoron, really, because ecology is famous for the sentence, it depends. And essentially, we're in every field, in every garden, in every ecosystem, the ecological dynamics and findings tend to be a little bit different. But what's really exciting is with the emergence of these remote sensing technologies, we can get this global perspective. And then what our approach is we sort of combine it with the on-the-ground findings of millions of scientists around the world, citizen scientists, academic scientists, NGO scientists, by pulling all the insights that they've sort of pulled together into one global picture and sort of correlating up with that satellite imagery, we can then see how the structure of ecosystems varies in predictable ways across the planet. So we can get beyond that, it depends, to start to see to understand the drivers of the context and understand how ecosystems vary and how the structure of those ecosystems vary and how the vulnerability and resilience of those ecosystems change across the planet as well. And it gives you this really unique combination of localized understanding combined with global perspective. So that's the goal.
So and I want to go to Diego. So this local understanding, you can't get more local than inside of ourselves. And this global understanding, this is where I'm so intrigued by this relationship between the local and global. Tell us a little bit about that and from your work and what you're doing.
Obviously, as you said, we cannot be more local than actually our own experience. Like you saw this morning, I mean, there's no experience there outside of who you are. And what is the central sort of experience here, or basically the operating system? It's your mind. And obviously the mind is being sort of modulated by the brain, so we have a lot of data now about what the brain does when you're in a certain state and how you can shift out of these states. But as you probably all know, it's not so easy. And so obviously there are different things working at the same time, which is your personal experience as well as your interpretation, as the sensing, as you were saying, Daniel, this morning. You know, they have the sensing, you have the intention that we set this morning, as well as you have the gut feeling that is maybe there. But what if it's actually completely screwed up because you're in a state where the brain is being hijacked by your fear response? So you can't think clearly, and it's wonderful to see how that field of how can we improve clear thinking, for example. And I am not an advocate to say abolish science or ignore the mind. It's actually something that I found that can be perfectly used in complementary ways. But the problem is that we have an operating system, to use a mechanical analogy, that is completely not under control. And that's where we find aggressions and fears and anxieties and all that basically panning out. And greed also is one of them. So zooming in and zooming out, I like that. We use that a lot also. Is okay, what you start discovering when you start zooming in a little bit more into your own mental processes, then you start discovering there's actually just not one thing. It's many things at the same time. And this is where ecology really has basically in the science world paved the ground to be a little bit more detailed. When in fact, over 2,500 years they have been doing that, but not in the outer world, but in the inner world.
Thank you. So Claudia, when listening to Diego talk about this improving clear thinking operating system not under control, when you're looking out at the globe, what are some of the things you see, and what are some of the things you've learned over the past, say, 5 years that might be triggered by this kind of thinking?
I think what I learned, or I think one of the most known examples that we just discussed here as well is the retreating glaciers, which is a very nice image, or when you create time lapse, meaning you're starting in the 80s, you're looking at some glaciers in Switzerland, how they retreat during the time, which is a very impressive image. So and I'm also glaciologist, so I'm really into glaciers. It's a very beautiful image, but it's very sad. And what I realized is exactly this effect. We are overwhelmed by the negative facts that we see, and we cannot stop the retreat of the glaciers. As a glaciologist, we know that. We cannot. It will adapt at a certain balance again, but we will lose them anyway, independent from what we are doing now, which is very depressing, right? So we tend to go into the situation that we say, okay, but we cannot do anything anyway. We're too small. We cannot act. And for me, that was like the eye-opening event last year when I went to a conference, and a guy was saying, look, we were all scientists. It was all different types of environmental science, climate change. And then they're like, look, if you know, we tell since years already, we are facing this issue, we're facing this crisis, but nothing happens. So let's say the human's normal reaction is there is this huge mountain, and we are scared, and we freeze, and we don't do anything. So his way to say we have to overcome this, and we have to go forward with examples. How can we, as an individual, change our behavior, maybe starting with an easy way that everyone can change, and not always pointing, it's so bad, the situation is so bad, that makes us feel like, okay, we don't do anything. And that impressed me quite a bit, and that's, I think, goes in the same direction. We have to overcome this fear in order to be able to react.
So, totally hear that, and I think that's a really important message. And how has it changed your work? As someone who's looking at the Earth from geospatial data and observations, how does it change what you do?
I try to make people aware and to put the seed that this data can be used in a positive way, that you can use the data to inform, to act, and then you can see also positive changes. So if you do restoration efforts, you can see on the satellite images how the trees are growing. And you can see the effect, and using this as a tool, as a very powerful tool, towards change and help doing the change.
So it's great. So I think this is, Tom, what Restore was trying to do, or is doing, is exactly trying to find the exemplars and to demonstrate the impact of positive change. Is that right?
Totally, exactly that. It's just bringing transparency to the movement. But I guess I want to just sort of second what you both have just said about it all. Nothing is going to happen if we get overwhelmed by the horror of the crisis. The best we will ever do, and the best we will ever achieve, and the best we will ever... our best chances are if we are all the best versions of ourselves. And in a way, I almost would like to sort of spread this idea of jumping in and enjoying the fight against climate change, figuring out ways that we... Obviously, it's horrific and terrible, suffering around the world. But if we can figure out ways that we can dive in, there's a bit at the end of The Lord of the Rings where Gimli, they're going into Mordor, and he goes, low chances of success, certainty of death, what are we waiting for? And then they rush into battle and win. I feel like we need to be tackling climate change with that level of yes, it's horrific, but we are the people who have the opportunity to fight this single global threat that threatens us all. It's it needs to be empowering us to be the best versions of ourselves. And that relates to what you were saying about being able to see change on the ground, and to what Restore's goal is. Restore is just a platform using satellite imagery and ground source data to just show the work of people all over the world. So to put that in context, we've been talking a lot about the relative importance of the top-down, the government decision-making that is definitely necessary to have regulation, and the bottom-up, which is where the action really happens. But in that bottom-up, we so often feel, but what is my individual little action really doing? It's not that, is it that consequential? What I firmly believe is that the thing that makes it consequential is just being able to connect the dots, to add them all up and to see them all collectively together. We launched Restore 2 years ago, and in that 2 years, we've got 350,000 projects that have come online. 150,000 of them are visible to the world. The others are private for now. They're not wanting to share their farms just yet. But each one of these is a place where someone has drawn out the outline of their garden or their local community farm or their conservation project. 350,000 locations where someone is showing that they are trying to think regeneratively with nature. And we can measure those changes. In many of them, they're really struggling. In many of them, they are absolutely thriving, and nature is returning en masse. And the most popular or the most common thing I hear from people using Restore is that they love it because they no longer feel alone. They were feeling like they were just doing it in their garden, and what's the point? I'm just growing a few vegetables or whatever, or I'm trying to recover my local community. What's the point of that if we're the only ones? Realizing that not only are there people next door doing it and just down the road doing it and just in the next region that they can learn from and grow from and sort of collaborate with, but there's hundreds of thousands of them all across the planet, and collectively they're adding up to a massive, massive global impact. That's the sort of thing that gives them the momentum to keep going. So Restore isn't the one doing anything in a way. These projects were already happening. They were already amazing. We tried to help them with giving them data, connecting them up with funders or with sustainable finance or with volunteers or people just to like and share. Every person here you can build, it's a social media platform. You can build your profile on Restore, go and like 1,000 projects, and that's good for them. But ultimately, it's just connecting up the dots, turns that local effort into a global impact, and it's what sort of is inspiring that movement.
It's really great, because I think this no longer feeling alone, I think many of us in this space appreciate that greatly. And this is where the resonance comes in, and not knowing we're not just alone on these journeys. And so, and you mentioned also earlier, we heard about the importance of local and actual action under things that we can do. And so when we think about regeneration and the things that we can do for each of your domains, right, what would you suggest are some of the things which we could, I don't like to use the word should, can do around what are the different things that we can and should be doing? I hate that word should. That's such a must. Thank you. Should is such a negative, nasty word. So what would you suggest for us? And I think about regeneration, and we've been talking about this morning. What comes to your mind is an action. So I'd like to think of what could I do tomorrow to begin? And what would you wish for us? Diego.
Yeah, what comes to my mind, particularly listening to my colleagues up here, is the importance of also pausing. Because if we don't pause, we're just going to basically perpetuate the reactivity. And reactivity is never really where we want to be. And so thinking, and then also be clear about, like Daniel was saying this morning, that our problems of today are actually yesterday's solutions, and our solutions today could be tomorrow's problems. And so we need to really become aware that we can actually also do something about our own mind and our own psyche, in that sense, to extend even about our intentions and what is it that we're really bringing onto the table. And one of the things that is really key is the hope, because if we lose hope, everything is basically lost. That basically we become defeatists, and we're basically proselyting the same thing, which is, well, we have nothing to do. And one thing that really struck me is how much, for example, and this is just my observation, when 30 years ago, by that time I already really seriously meditated 10 years. 30 years ago I said, I meditate. People were asking me, what did you smoke? And then 20 years ago, well, you have been hanging out in India way too long, so you're already brainwashed. But 10 years ago, it's really started moving that if I were to ask here, who has ever meditated, probably majority would raise their hands in some way or another, how disciplined. So that's another question. But we have really observed a massive shift because science, to some extent, these dialogues that I've had the privilege to curate over 25 years, and I just brought, these are 6 books that have all emerged of these dialogues. Daniel Goleman was involved, Richard Davidson and Harrington and Cy Jones. These are all basically on the level of Nobel laureates that have been in these dialogues about, okay, what could we do? But that starts also with thinking and be clear. And we are very much sort of stuck often in when it comes to sort of our happiness to be like hunters and gatherers. We do something and we hope. And we find something here that is of benefit. But how about becoming more strategic? How become a more sort of like here, think first, discuss and dialogue. And I see a lot has already been happening. Also because science is showing that mental training is not only it works, but is also beneficial.
Right. Yeah, because I think you were part of the project which with His Holiness and others were putting their heads into MRI and actually could prove that meditation changes.
I'm an official guinea pig.
You were an official guinea pig. You were one of those who basically could prove that meditation changes brain function.
Yeah.
So I think that's really cool. You can ask him about that. Right. So what about the two of you? And then we're going to come to you for questions. So if you have questions you want to ask, and the wind is coming up, so we're going to in this stormy moment. Thoughts?
I think what I experience in my daily work, let's say, is like when you go out, not being such a like inspiring environment like here. I think here everyone is like really open-minded and wants to change something. And when you go into, let's say, the real life, meaning being the private companies, they're often in their world, they have to gain money, they have to survive, and they do not have really the capacity or the willingness or whatever to see left and right and to see that there are new emerging information, technologies, trends that they could even adapt for their own work and it would be helpful for them. So what for me would be very important is to have people staying open-minded and look left and right and get a bit out of our own fields, boxes or business to see what are the others doing. And maybe they already solved kind of some of the issues I have that I can use and I don't have to start from scratch. And I can be more efficient. So that would be my
I like that.
input.
Look left and right. Look for the solutions already. Stand on the shoulders of others who've already created the solutions. Tom, thought, and then it'll be your chance to ask some questions.
All right, I've had the longest time to think about this answer, which I thought would help me, but it's actually screwed me because I've now got 20 options. But I'm going to go with 2. The first being a general one, which is, it sounds so cliche to say it, but I would just say have optimism and belief. And I know it. I think everyone here would also say that, but it's so many times, so many people I meet are so sad about the fate of climate change. And I don't know if it's useful. I'm not sure. I've just been thinking about this off the top of my head. But humanity is eventually going to die. And that sounds brutally horrible. But eventually it's going to die. There are always going to be global threats facing humanity. If we overcome climate change and biodiversity loss, there will certainly be other ones. The incredible thing that we have is that we, for the first time in human history, 100 years ago, people were burning witches at the stake. I don't know how long ago that was, actually. My history's terrible. Burning people at the stake for being witches. There wasn't a collective global threat that we could collectively fight against. And every little action that we take contributes to that army of effort against this one global threat. And that's got to be an empowering thought that can drive us forward. The other one is a much more practical suggestion. Please, if you or anyone you know or any organization that you know of is working with nature, is claiming that they are restoring trees or conserving forests, don't believe them until they've put it on Restore or other organisers like it. When my next door neighbour can see it for free, then I'll believe them. Until then, I don't believe a single thing. If we can get them all together, we can then show what this global movement's doing.
That's great. Okay, thank you for that very, very much. And so now, questions for you. I'm going to say one thing, talking to my son, when we went up to Zermatt and looking around that area, we went walking, and I kept talking about the loss. And he just kept looking at me like, well, Papa, this is the first time I've seen these. I don't see loss. I just see an existing condition. And it's really interesting for me, that perspective of mine of loss and his of context. This is as given, and now what? And he's very active in looking at energy solutions. This is what his profession is. And so it made me realize that, as you said, there is optimism to be had. And I'm not quite sure about the party of as the Titanic's going down, but okay, we can do that. Who has a question? All right. Here we go. I got a mic right here. I hid.
Oh, that's why we couldn't find it.
Yeah, I was setting it up here. There we go.
He was hiding it. You can have the...
All right. Okay.
Hello, thank you very much for your super interesting presentations and talks. I have a question that I guess is directed to all three of you. And I really admire and I join in the optimism. And I believe that there is a big movement going on. But I want to ask you about how to further scale this up, ecosystem restoration, how to meet the resistances, and what kind of struggle we need to face. Because I believe in a struggle in a compassionate, loving way, approaching the other side in this way. But the resistances are huge, the profit motives of the industry are large, and I think, as I am informed, biodiversity loss is not declining, it's accelerating, the thinning of land is accelerating. So from your personal perspective, where do you see the real angles for change to really scale it up fast and meet the resistances? Sorry for this big question.
Oof. Okay, Tom, you get that one first. You don't have time to react now. You go now.
All right, off the top of my head, I think it's about just showing what's going on. I really believe there can be immense optimism when we show. If Greta was marching down the streets on her own and no one was looking at it, there would be no massive climate movement. We need that for biodiversity, but it's really hard because biodiversity is different in every part of the planet. Biodiversity is this immensely complicated and difficult challenge. Obviously, the reason I've sunk so much energy into Restore is that I believe that by showing the world that there's millions of local communities, bottom-up efforts and indigenous populations thriving in association with nature, eventually that first will have an incredible impact on its own, but secondly, it will lead to change from the top. Because let's face it, politicians are really, I used this analogy earlier, they're like a chat GPT. They're here to regurgitate what we ask from them. They are just going to give us back what we demand of them or what we put into them. And if hundreds of thousands or millions of people are saying, we need nature at this scale, you need to help me protect, that is when I believe policy structures will become much more useful for empowering that movement to grow and grow and grow. So that's my immediate thought.
Thank you. Claudia, do you have, or Diego, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's one of the key elements here is really bringing awareness to the issues at stake. And we can actually bring it back to our own health. When we are feeling unwell, some of us then start looking, well, what is the cause of that? And then you start maybe changing your diet, maybe you change your behaviors and all of that. But we all know how difficult that is, even if there is medical evidence that you had a heart attack, and changing habits is very difficult. And so this is where I think the research, and particularly also the practices around changing habits, are so important. It's not just a cognitive process, because we have a whole system that is in place through emotions, through our biological functions, that basically perpetuates these behaviors. But without us pointing that maybe that is an issue, if you look like in the 70s, what happened? People were dying and nobody knew why they were dying of heart failure. Well, they were dying because they were having problems with their diet and the movement. And so science, medical science particularly, started showing, okay, this behavior needs to change if we want to stay or become healthy. So the restoration there is also in place if you apply that. And why do we do, for example, brushing our teeth? We don't need to brush our teeth just for pleasure, but we do it because we are actually preventing. This is us as a species that are, to some extent, quite unique because we have a possibility to project ourselves into the future. And why not tap that into, but not haphazardly, more really with intention?
I think this question is actually struggling me for a while, because what we also saw when fast, rapid change is possible, what we've seen with COVID, but only for issues that endangers us immediately. And climate change and biodiversity decline is very difficult to capture because it's a long-term effect. Even with showing nice pictures, that's not provoking really an action, a rapid action, what we see now in the world. Where I see a way we can accelerate is like this, talking in a way that it becomes normal, meaning that it's not special that I want to save whatever biodiversity, or that I drive an electric car, or that I take public transportation, but we should communicate it in a way that that's the normal thing to do. It's not special. It's just what we do. And I feel that makes the same as we are not eating vegetarian food anymore. We are just eating food, right? And there's no meat in there. Okay, fine, good. But changing the what is the normal things to do and don't make it exceptional. And I think if we do that all the time, over and over again, it becomes normal in everyone's head. It's like brushing the teeth. That's normal. No one is asking anymore why we're doing that, but before it was special. So I think that's a way to go, that we can really do something in our daily life.
That's great. I like that, especially sort of realigning, resetting, realigning normal. And it's a language, it's a mindset, so we're realigning what normal is, can, and be. We have time for one more question. I see, go ahead.
I had a chance this morning, so if somebody else wants to.
Does someone else have John has one in the way back and to the left. Okay. Oh. Go ahead, John, and then we'll see.
So I like very much the idea of making visual all the positive that's being done worldwide. So I think that's really super. But I have to come back to the dark side of the 942 or 44 million odd cattle, the 2.5 billion of pigs, and I don't know how many billions of chicken, that their biomass is now exceeding all of wildlife and so on. So what can we do about the dark side, in addition to all you're doing in terms of the visualization of the good stuff?
So if you have a direct answer to that, then good. Otherwise, I think there are others in the room who have answers to this as well. So we can ask others, perhaps. Do you have any thoughts on this, on the dark side?
Well, I don't know. I don't have much thoughts. The thing is, I get this question quite a lot from media. They always go, yeah, you're saying all the nice stuff, but I just came out of a local community in Brazil where they cannot make ends meet unless they remove the forest. Or historically, we exist in a society, in an economic system that means that the vast majority of us have to live at the expense of nature. The things that we do and consume come at the expense of nature. Now, the nature of the question almost suggests, but there's loads of people that aren't managing to live positively with nature, so should we just give up? And I think the whole point is we just have to learn as much as we can from the tiny fraction that are living in a positive relationship with nature, and grow that ratio. There's currently 90-10. Hopefully we can flip it. And in the next decade, we've got to flip it from 10-90 towards the majority of us being able to live in a way that we can be economically and spiritually empowered by the presence of nature. And it's all of the solutions that everyone in this room is trying to put together that will all be necessary if we're going to be able to move in that direction. But we have to be able to be optimistic in that fight, I believe. We need outrage and optimism.
Does anybody have comments from the audience? Because this is a pretty intense question. Daniel, do you want to go ahead? Let's grab a mic for Daniel. Diego's got one there. Thanks, Kenny.
I'm just wondering, can we use the capacity that we have for visualizing geospatial data and what we know about climate change to also shine a light on the fact that, I don't know the exact figures here, but roughly 200 companies are responsible for about 50% of the global emissions. So I love what you're all doing, but can we visualize, and it flips back to us because we're buying from these companies, so it's a both and. But I would be really interested in, because that's a bit of addressing the dark side, and it's not easy for funding, and you get a lot of pushback if you do that. And just another brief comment, the fight on climate change as the problem. Climate change is a symptom. I think Diego is closer to talking about the problem. Climate change is a symptom. So just the invitation to watch out how we use memes and language to not actually support the dark side.
Interesting. That's great. Other comments or questions? I can feel the rooms. We're tired. It's hot. We're sweating. It's like, ah.
Maybe I can just quickly give a very technical answer. Yes, there are satellites being launched very soon who should be able to monitor point sources of emissions and CO2. So at least in this direction, there is something going on.
I also just wanted to add to this and say there's also websites that visualize this. So where you...
Yeah, so...
I mean like a map.
I couldn't hear that. So I just want to ask a quick question. So to what granularity are you going to be able, or will the satellites be able to show point source? Do you know?
I don't know the resolutions. I think there are several approaches. So they're like big scale companies, but it's, if you look at emissions, it's atmosphere. So you have wind, so you don't need the granular resolution, but there are some supporting systems that should be really able to point to power plants or whatever. So
because one of the most recent satellites, we could see methane leaks, methane flares that were before just lost in the atmosphere. So they're starting to get down to almost like half a kilometer or something like that. David might know too. I don't know. Where we can begin to see. I was kind of curious because this is a very interesting issue. Also from agriculture, to what degree can we see beneath the canopy, right? This is...
Canopy is always an issue for satellites, so there is no...
That's what I'm saying.
There is no solution on that one. But I mean, it's not just satellite by its own who give information. I mean, you have a lot of different knowledge that you can combine it with to get to the real sources. So,
right. But this is how you find the source. Okay, that's a good, interesting question there. So there's Charlie has a question in the back. Kenny, if you could grab that. And who else has a question? We have time for one more, then Alice in the front.
Well, one thought I couldn't let go of on this dark side. Some of us experienced tremendous regeneration during COVID in ecosystems, things that came back very, very quickly. And I think we need to remember that. If we can find a way to pause again in a more permanent way, the healing capacity of the earth was put on display. My question, and perhaps it's for later over drinks, what would the Dalai Lama say to this room?
Ooh.
We have had actually a conference. I host this conference on climate change, and that was now 13 years ago. And at that time, it was really sort of like just the in-group. The ICPP had just published a paper of the boundaries, the loss of boundaries. And so it was, they came from there. So we had a whole group, and we were really discussing this whole thing. And I think his answer would still be, what he did at that time, say, we need to act locally each person individually can, for example, try as much possible to avoid doing what is much easier to do otherwise. So we need to bring in ethics into this whole discussion. And ethics, at least from my understanding, is a real clearer understanding of what are the consequences of my actions and my behavior in accordance with that. Because we're so intellectual, we're so good at thinking things through, but the question is, do we really behave in accordance with that? And often we don't, at the detriment of ourselves, when we get angry, for example. So mind training, and I'm really not going deep into it all because that would not be the place for that, but mind training really can help you with that, like fear or blockage or kind of like resignation. And for me, regeneration is really, like you said, why did we have during the COVID lockdown time to regenerate? Because we were forced to not be so distracted. So once you start focusing on, and this is clearly shown in all sorts of research, that one of the biggest problems that we face is lack of focus. And with the social media, what is it that we're undermining? Capacity to focus. And I don't mean watch a movie for 3 hours in a row, but can we really be focused from within as opposed from without?
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Diego. Allison, let's print the mic up here, and then this will be the last question. We're out of time. Allison?
Yeah, I just want to talk to this thing of the dark side. I feel like it's kind of demonizing some people, and it feels very like someone might look at me and say, well, my actions are the dark side, right? Like I'm an environmental scientist. I've known so much for so long. I'm not perfect in any way, shape, or form. And so it's like this idea that there's a dark side. I think that's to our disservice. I think like what we damns us back in the sense that we're ignoring it. We try to demonize it. And I just find like, from what I know around trauma and healing, it's like a lot of people act out of ignorance and really not maybe having the brain space to feel into stuff, and they're disconnected. So I would just encourage us to have a more compassionate wording around this.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Allison and Cynthia, and then we're going to go to the end of this. We're going to do the front row here. So, Cynthia, go ahead and comment, and then...
Just to build on that, as someone who's kind of at the nexus of corporate and non-corporate, I think there's a lot to be said for being able to change the system from within, which I know sounds very cliche, but there are a lot of really good people, good thinkers, and good action happening within the corporate space. So I think I'm with you. I think to just say black and white, dark side is actually not a nuanced enough look.
Yeah. Thank you. Very much so. And then, go ahead. You're gonna want to ask a question?
Yeah, actually, it's a question, I guess, out of a not continuity of the other asked for Claudia. I'm very poorly educated on satellites and space, but what do you think about also satellites waste and privatization of satellites and Starlink and all this? These are kind of the hit topic. If you can say fast, since we're running out of time.
I can be fast. I think we have to be careful. Yes, it's a business as well, and I think it helps in general to have better technologies, more information, so on and so forth. But yes, it is like the Wild West out there right now, and we have to be careful that we can still assure the, let's say, satellites that we have up there that are for everyone, and not having it just only economically driven. However, what is going on now in the space race, more or less, it helps also to advance all other fields. So I think we have to be careful. There is a good side, there is a bad side. Yeah, there is a lot of potential, let's say, but it is an economical driven world right now that can, if it's not like managed in a careful way, we will have some issues in future for sure.
Okay, we have now come to the time of transition. And before we do this, I want to thank the three of you very, very much for taking us on a journey from outer space to inner space. Really fantastic. Thank you. You know, a few things that just hit me so much to say, jump in and enjoy the action. You know, I really appreciate that because, as you said, this is something we really need to be thinking about, and also the optimism, our focus, how do we focus? And I'm glad to hear of another person who loves glaciers. And we're going on a glacier walk for those who want to tomorrow, Saturday at what time? 2 o'clock after lunch. Who's never been on a glacier? No. So if there's a chance if you'd like to go see one of the most beautiful big hunks of ice and snow and rock, play and everything else, it's a chance to do it. Yeah, sometimes these are hard, and I think words matter. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think all of us need to think about that and how we use the words we use and what we mean by the words. And I think this is really important in our messaging with each other and to each other. And I think I want to, again, thank you for bringing that up. That's really important. Thank you again for being up here and joining us today. So thanks, guys.